The clock on the stove read 6:42 a.m. when I saw her. The sun was just beginning to burn the gray mist off the valley floor, and the light, thin and silver, caught the metallic glint of the bolt cutters in her hand. She was standing on my property, right where the old gravel drive meets the first row of apple trees, a place my father had marked with a granite post half a century ago. From my kitchen window, over the rim of my coffee mug, I watched her. Carol Bradshaw, president of the Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association, dressed in a pristine pink tracksuit that seemed to defy the morning dew, was about to commit criminal trespass and destruction of property. And I, Arthur Miller, was going to let her. She was not alone. Two men from a local landscaping company, looking profoundly uncomfortable, stood by a small truck parked on the HOA's manicured common area grass. She gestured toward the simple chain and padlock on my gate, speaking to them in a low, sharp tone I couldn't hear but could easily imagine. It would be something about community progress, about beautification, about rules that everyone, especially me, had to follow. The chain was a courtesy, really. It was not a serious barrier. It was meant to remind people, politely, that this was private land. For years, it had been enough. One of the men took the bolt cutters from her. He looked over his shoulder, first at her, then toward my house. His eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. I gave no sign, no wave, no shake of the head. I simply took a slow sip of my coffee. I wanted him to see me. I wanted him to see that I was not surprised. I wanted him, and, more importantly, her, to complete the act. In my line of work, you learn that a threatened action is a negotiation. A completed action is evidence. The snap of the cutters breaking the chain was surprisingly loud in the quiet morning air. It echoed faintly off the hills. Carol smiled, a thin, triumphant expression. Car, R, 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 har, bar. She pushed the gate open with a proprietary air, the metal groaning in protest. She gestured the men forward, pointing toward a spot just inside my property line where they were clearly meant to dig. They began unloading a prefabricated wooden sign from the back of their truck. I could already read the neatly routed letters. Oak Haven Community Orchard. I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug in the sink, and placed it carefully in the dishwasher. I slipped on a pair of old boots, grabbed the file from my desk, a simple heavy manila folder, worn soft at the edges from years of handling and my phone. Then I walked outside, down the cool flagstone path, and stopped about 20 feet from them, just on the edge of my lawn. Carol saw me, and her smile widened. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the confrontation. The performance. Arthur, she said, her voice carrying a tone of practiced patience, the kind one uses on a difficult child. Ah, good. I am glad you're here to see the new improvements. We're finally formalizing the community as access to this wonderful shared resource. I did not say anything. I just stood there holding the file. As you know, as she continued, stepping toward me, her hands on her hips, the board voted unanimously to designate this orchard as a community green space. Your old, rusted gate was an eyesore and, frankly, a liability. We'll be installing a proper HOA-approved entrance here, and this sign will make it clear to everyone that this is a place for all Oak Haven residents to enjoy. I remained silent. My silence seemed to unnerve her more than any argument could. It robbed her performance of its intended audience response. You have been sent the notices. Arthur, she snapped, her voice losing its patient veneer. You have been ignoring the fines for non-compliance with community standards. Your continued attempts to privatize this historic community asset ends today. The police have been notified that we are performing this HOA-sanctioned work. If you interfere, you will be arrested for trespassing. On your own property, she laughed at her own clever turn of phrase. I raised my phone, its screen dark, and pressed the record button. The small red light was barely visible, but I knew it was on. I angled it slightly to capture her, the workers, the sign, and the broken chain lying in the wet grass. This orchard," I said, my voice calm and low, "is not, nor has it ever been, community property." Oh, please," she scoffed. Everyone knows this has been used by the community for years. Your own wife used to let the neighborhood children pick apples here. It is historic use. It is what makes Oakhaven special. You cannot just take that away, because you are a bitter old man." The mention of Eleanor was a calculated cruelty, a tool to provoke an emotional reaction. It was a mistake. It clarified things. I looked past her, at the rows of trees stretching up the gentle slope behind my house. The Gravensteins, the Northern Spies, the Honeycrisps, my wife had planted just before she got sick. Each tree was a memory, marker of a season in our life. Together, this wasn't just land, it was a living archive. I brought my gaze back to her. Carol Bradshaw," I said, making sure to use her full name for the recording. You are the acting president of the Oakhaven Estates Homeowners Association. Is that correct?" "Of course it is," she said, puffing up with self-importance. And in that capacity," I continued, my tone unchanging, "you have authorized these men to enter my property, destroy my lock, and erect a sign claiming this land for the HOA. It is not your land. It is a community asset." "The board has decided," she said, her voice rising. Now if you'll excuse us, we have work to do. Any further obstruction will result in fines, a lien on your house, and your arrest." I nodded slowly. I looked at the two workers, who had stopped and were watching this exchange with wide eyes. I looked at the broken chain. I looked at the sign that declared my family's history to be a public park. And I looked at her, a woman so convinced of her own righteousness that she could not see the abyss she was standing on the edge of. She had no idea. She had no idea that the ground beneath her feet was documented, deeded and defended by a paper trail that went back 70 years. She had no idea who I was, what I did for a living for 45 years, or what was inside the file I was holding. She had no idea she had just handed me the final, perfect, irrefutable piece of evidence I needed to dismantle her little empire of petty tyranny, piece by paper piece. But before I tell you what I did next, before I explain the harvest and the meeting that followed, I should probably explain how we got here. It did not start with a pair of bolt cutters. It started, as these things so often do, with a quiet kindness and a vacuum of power. My name, as I said, is Arthur Miller. I am 72 years old. For 45 of those years, I was a land surveyor and civil engineer, specializing in boundary disputes and water rights. It is a profession that teaches you three things. God is in the details, paper is more powerful than opinion, and the straightest line between 2 points is often a lawsuit. My work was my life, until I met Eleanor. After she passed 5 years ago, this house, and more specifically this orchard, became the center of my quiet world. It was the last best piece of her I had left. I am, by nature, a non-confrontational man. I prefer to observe, to measure, to document. I believe in rules, in order, in the clear, unambiguous language of a property deed. My entire professional life was dedicated to resolving conflicts by finding the objective, documented truth. Emotion, in my experience, only serves to obscure the survey markers. The orchard itself predates the Oakhaven Estates development by 3 decades. My father bought this parcella 20 acres of rolling hillside back in 1958. He was a farmer, and this was his passion project. He planted the first heritage apple trees. When I was a boy, this was all farmland. Then, in the late 80s, a developer bought the surrounding 100 acres. My father, ready for retirement, sold them all but this 5-acre plot with the house and the orchard. He was a shrewd man. He knew the value of holding on to the high ground. The deal he struck with the developer was crystal clear, and I know because I helped him draft the language. Our parcel, designated as Lot 1 on the final plat map, was explicitly excluded from the newly formed Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association. We were an island of private property, surrounded by the new development, but not a part of it. We had our own septic and a recorded easement for the gravel drive that connected us to the new public road. On paper, our independence was absolute. For 30 years, that piece of paper was all that mattered. The HOA was a sleepy, benevolent entity, concerned mostly with lawn maintenance and the annual holiday decoration contest. We were good neighbors. Eleanor, especially, was beloved. She was the heart of this place. She knew everyone's name, their children's birthdays, their secret sorrows. And yes, she would invite the neighborhood kids into the orchard every fall to pick a bag of apples. It was an act of grace, a gift freely given. It was never a right. Then came Carol Bradshaw. She and her husband moved in about 8 years ago. She was a woman who radiated a restless, ambitious energy. She saw the sleepy HOA not as a neighborhood committee but as a platform. She started by volunteering, then got herself elected to the board as secretary. She was organized, efficient, and utterly ruthless. She mastered the association as by law saw, rather her interpretation of them. She found rules no one knew existed and began enforcing them with a zeal that bordered on religious. Her rise to the presidency was a case study in petty politics. She used procedural maneuvers to sideline older board members and cultivated a small, loyal following of residents who either feared her or admired her get things done attitude. She became president 4 years ago, and the tenor of the neighborhood changed almost overnight. The friendly suggestion to trim a hedge became a registered letter, demanding compliance or threatening a $100 fine. The holiday decoration contest became a source of bitter dispute over approved color palettes. She was a performative tyrant, building her authority on a foundation of public shaming and fabricated emergencies. I watched it all, quietly. I saw her harangue poor Mr. Henderson, a widower, like myself, for the placement of his wife as memorial birdbath. I saw her fine a young family because their toddler's plastic slide was visible from the street. Each transgression was a small thing, too small to fight a war over, but they accumulated, creating a climate of low-grade fear. Her focus turned to me about 2 years ago. It started subtly. A note in my mailbox about the non-maintainer nature of my gravel drive. I ignored it. I was not part of the HOA. Their rules did not apply to me. Then came a formal letter on official HOA letterhead, informing me that my property was in violation of community standards. It was the first time she had formally attempted to assert authority over my land. This was the moment, the first piece of paper for my file. I didn't argue. I did not call her. I did not walk over and explain the history of my property. Doing so would have been a waste of breath. People like Carol don't care about facts that contradict the world they've built in their minds. Instead, I opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, the one where I kept the old deeds and survey maps. I pulled out a fresh manila folder. With a black felt tip pen, I wrote a BRADSHAWC on the tab. I placed her letter inside. I kept the receipts. Over the next 2 years, the folder grew thick. She sent fines for the overgrown nature of the orchard, which was, in fact, a professionally managed ecosystem. She sent notices about the unapproved fence, which was the same gate that had stood there for 40 years. I paid a few of the smaller initial fines. I did it by check, mailed via certified mail. A paid fine in some legal arguments can be construed as an admission of the authority to levy it. But a check is also a beautiful piece of evidence. It creates a paper trail. My canceled check, her signature on the deposit slip, proved she had received payment for a fine she had no legal right to issue. It was a baited hook. The issue of the orchard itself began to escalate last fall. She started referring to it as a community orchard in the HOA newsletter. And she wrote a fanciful piece about the ahistoric tradition of community harvesting, twisting Eleanor's long-ago kindness into an established legal right of access. It was a brilliant piece of propaganda. New residents, who had no knowledge of the history, accepted it as fact. She was creating a narrative, and in the absence of a counter-narrative, hers was winning. That was when I decided a passive approach was no longer sufficient. It was time for a formal warning. I wasn't naive enough to think it would work, but it was a necessary step in the process. You must be able to show the court that you made a reasonable attempt to resolve the matter before seeking their intervention. I drafted a letter. It was a simple 2-page document. Page 1 was a polite but firm cease and desist. It detailed my ownership of Lot 1, cited the specific paragraph in the Oakhaven Estates Master Declaration that excluded my property from HOA governance, and respectfully requested that she and the HOA cease all communications, notices, and claims regarding my land. Page 2 was a high-resolution copy of the original 1988 county plat map. I used a yellow highlighter to trace the boundaries of my property, and the explicit notation, a Lot 1, not subject to Oakhaven Estates, HOA covenants and restrictions. I sent the letter via certified mail, return receipt, requested. The green card came back a week later bearing her spiky confident signature. I tucked it into my file. For a month, there was silence. I allowed myself a small glimmer of hope that the simple, undeniable truth of a legal document might have penetrated her self-assurance. I was wrong. Her response came, not in a letter, but in person. She saw me checking my mail one afternoon and marched across the street. She was holding my letter, folded and creased, in her hand. "I, Arthur. I received your little memo," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "And I have to say, I'm disappointed. Forging old documents, really. We have our own copies of the community plans, and they say nothing of the sort. This orchard belongs to the community. It's a matter of record." She did not just ignore my evidence, she accused me of fabricating it. This was a significant escalation. Slander of title is a serious thing. She tore the letter in half, then into quarters, and let the pieces flutter into the gutter. "The board considers the matter closed," she said, and turned her back on me. She had no idea she had just committed another tort I could add to my list, and that Mr. Henderson had been watching the entire exchange from his living room window. That was the day I went back to my desk and got to work. The game had changed. This was no longer about defending my property. It was about systematically dismantling her illegitimate authority. I called Gene, my paralegal for over 30 years. He'd retired to Florida, but was bored out of his mind. The prospect of a good old-fashioned document dive energized him. A tin-pot dictator in a tracksuit. "You say?" "Ha," he chuckled over the phone. "Artie, this is the kind of stuff we were born for." My home office became a command center. I had my old drafting table set up, my survey maps laid out. Gene, working remotely, began a deep dive into the county's digital records. We started assembling a complete history of Lot 1 and the Oakhaven HOA. We pulled every deed transfer, every permit, every tax record. We cross-referenced them with the HOA's own filings, their articles of incorporation, their annual reports, the minutes from their meetings that were a matter of public record. I worked with a calm, focused clarity I hadn't felt in years. This was my craft. Each document was a piece of a puzzle. A property description is a legal poem. A surveyor's mark is a historical fact carved in stone. Carol was operating in a world of gossip, opinion, and social pressure. I was preparing to meet her on a battlefield of verifiable facts. We discovered a few interesting things. First, Carol had let the 20 HOA's official corporate registration with the state lapse for 6 months 2 years prior. During that period, any decisions made by the board, including several rounds of rule changes she had pushed through, were technically invalid. She had since rectified the registration, but the actions taken during the lapse were legally void. Second, we found that the community plans she had referred to were a cheap marketing brochure map from the original sales office, not the legally binding plat map filed with the county. She was either a fool or a fraud. I was betting on the latter, but the bombshell discovery, the piece of evidence that would become the linchpin of my entire case, came from a box in my own attic. Eleanor had been a meticulous record keeper. After she passed, I couldn't bring myself to go through her things, but now I had a reason. I was looking for old photographs of the orchard, anything that could establish its continuous private use. Instead, I found a box labeled A Neighborhood 1990 seconds. Inside, beneath old holiday cards and invitations to long-forgotten potlucks, was a VHS tape. On the label, in Eleanor's elegant script, was written, "A Hoffen First Homeowners Meeting, June 1989. She had been the neighborhood's unofficial historian, taking her giant camcorder to every event. I don't own a VCR anymore, but I knew a place in town that could convert the tape to a digital file. I drove there that afternoon, my heart pounding with a strange mixture of grief and anticipation. 2 hours later, I had an MP4 file on a thumb drive. I went home, sat at my desk, and clicked play. The quality was what you would expect from a 30-year-old home video. But the audio was clear. There on the screen was a much younger version of my neighbor, Mr. Henderson. And there, at a makeshift podium, was John Oakhaven himself, the original developer. He was taking questions from the new homeowners. A woman in the audience asked about the large orchard on the hill. And then I heard it. John Oakhaven, clear as day, explaining the situation. Folks, I want to be very clear about this, he said, pointing in the general direction of my house. The Miller farm, that 5-acre plot up there, is not part of our development. Art Miller's father did us a favor by selling us the rest of the land. And we need to be good neighbors. That is private property. It is not a park. It is not common ground. I cannot stop his family from being generous if they choose to be, but you have no legal right to go on that land without their permission. It is all spelled out in the Master Declaration, which you all received a copy of. I sat back in my chair, the sound of my own breathing loud in the quiet room. It was more than a smoking gun. It was a cannon. It was the original developer, the author of the community's own rules, stating for the record the exact truth I had been trying to explain. And I had it on video. I made 3 separate backups of the file before I went to bed that night. The folder on my desk no longer felt like a defense. It felt like a weapon. A few weeks later, Carol made her next move, the one that led to the 6:42 a.m. confrontation. She sent out a community-wide email announcing the A Orchard beautification project. It detailed the board's plan to remove my unauthorized gate, install a welcoming sign, and publish official rules for community use. The project was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. This was her declaration of war. The morning of the bolt cutters, after she made her threats and I made my recording, I didn't argue further. I simply said, Carol, you and your contractors are trespassing. I am asking you, one time, to leave my property. We're not going anywhere, she said smugly. I'll call the police if you want. We've already given them a heads-up. That won't be necessary, I replied. You've already done it for me. She believed I was bluffing. She turned her back on me and ordered the men to start digging the post holes for her sign. I walked back inside my house. I didn't call the police. I called the county sheriff's department. There's a difference. Municipal police often get tangled in local politics. The sheriff's office tends to be more concerned with state law and property rights. I reported a trespass in progress. I gave my name, my address, and a brief factual description of the event. I made sure to mention they were using equipment to alter the landscape. That elevated the potential charge from simple trespass to something more serious. 20 minutes later, a sheriff's cruiser pulled up. 2 deputies got out, a senior, weathered-looking man with sergeant's stripes and a much younger deputy. Sergeant Davis, according to his name tag. Carol sprang into action. This was the performance she had been rehearsing. She rushed toward them, her face a mask of worried civic duty. "Oh, thank goodness, you're here, officers," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "This man, Arthur Miller, has been threatening us. We are here on behalf of the Oakhaven Homeowners Association, performing a sanctioned community improvement project on HOA common land, and he is trying to intimidate my workers." I and Sergeant Davis listened patiently, his expression unreadable. He looked from her, to the men with the shovels, to the sign, lying on the grass, and then to me, standing quietly on my porch. "Mom," he said, his voice a calm baritone. "Can you show me where the property line is?" It is here," Carol said, gesturing vaguely. "This is all part of the community greenbelt. His property starts way up by the house." The sergeant walked over to the granite post my father had set in the ground 50 years ago. He looked at it, then pulled out his phone, and appeared to be looking at a map. "According to the county parcel map," he said without looking up, "the property line runs right through this marker. Everything behind it, where your men are digging, is listed as Lot 1. Owner Arthur Miller." Carol's face flushed. "That is that is an old map. It is wrong. The HOA documents supersede that, Dean." The sergeant finally looked at her. Mom. An HOA document cannot supersede a deeded and recorded county plat map. That's not how property law works, hey." He then turned and walked toward me. Sir, are you Arthur Miller?" "Am," I said. "Is this your property?" "It is." I held out 2 documents for him. My driver's license, showing my address, and a copy of my most recent property tax bill from the county for this specific parcel. These were simple, direct, and official. He examined them briefly and handed them back. "Do you want these individuals on your land?" "I do not," I said. I have asked them to leave and they have refused." "And you are willing to sign a complaint for trespassing?" I said calmly. "And for destruction of property. Regarding the cut chain and lock." I then looked directly at the younger deputy, who had his body camera activated. For the record, my name is Arthur Miller. I am the legal owner of this property, Lot 1. The individuals present, at the direction of Carol Bradshaw, have entered my property without permission, destroyed my property, and have refused to leave after being asked. I wish for them to be removed, and for this incident to be fully documented in a report, of which I will require a copy. A used precise language. I created a clear, unambiguous record of events. This was no longer a neighborhood squabble. It was a formal police matter. Sergeant Davis's expression did not change, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Respect. Perhaps he had seen this play out 100 times. The hysterical, self-important citizen versus the calm, prepared one. He knew who had their facts straight. He turned back to Carol. Her confident smirk had been replaced by a tight, angry line. Ma'am, the sergeant said, his voice now firm. This is a civil matter that you will have to take up with a judge. But for right now, this is his property, according to the official county records. You and your workers need to leave. Now, this is ridiculous. Carol shrieked. I am the president of the HOA. You cannot just take his side. I am not taking anyone's side. Mom, I am enforcing the law as it pertains to trespass. You are on property that does not belong to you. The owner wants you gone. If you do not leave, I will have to place you under arrest. It has that simple. He looked at the two landscapers. Boys, I suggest you pack up your sign and go. You're working on the wrong piece of land today. The workers, who wanted no part of this, practically threw their tools back in the truck. Carol stood there, vibrating with rage, her face a blotchy red. She glared at me, her eyes promising retribution. This is not over. Arthur, she hissed. Y'all be hearing from our lawyers. We will bury you in legal fees. Look forward to it, I said. She finally stormed off, trailing the landscaping truck as it beat a hasty retreat. Sergeant Davis stayed behind for a few minutes to take my full statement. He gave me a card with an incident report number on it. For what it is worth, Mr. Miller, he said as he was leaving. You handled that perfectly. Having your paperwork in order makes our job a lot easier. As I watched the cruiser drive away, I felt a profound sense of, not victory, but of order. Being restored, the process was working. But I knew Carol. This defeat would not chasten her, it would enrage her. She would double down, and her next move would be exactly the final piece of the puzzle I needed. The next day, two things happened that solidified the shifting tide. The first was a phone call from a number I did not recognize. It was Sarah, one of the newer HOA board members. She sounded nervous. Mr. Miller, she began. I need to talk to you off the record. I was at the board meeting where Carol proposed the A. Orchard beautification project. She told us that you had agreed in principle to donate the land to the HOA, and that the gate and sign were just a formality. She showed us an email that she claimed was from you. My blood ran cold. I never sent such an email. Did Nate think so? Sarah said, her voice dropping to a whisper. It just didn't Nate feel right. After she came back from the incident with the sheriff yesterday, she was furious. She called an emergency meeting and told us you had gone back on your word and were trying to extort the HOA. She's getting the HOA's lawyer to file an emergency injunction. She's lying, is not she? She's lying to all of us. Fraud, forgery, misuse of HOA funds. The list was getting longer. Sarah, I said calmly. Would you be willing to sign an affidavit to that effect? There was a long pause. I could hear her weighing the risk of crossing Carol. Yes, she finally said. I think I have to. She had become the disillusioned insider. The second event happened that afternoon. A knock on my door. It was Mr. Henderson, my neighbor, the one with the bird bath. He was holding a dusty cardboard box. Arthur, he said, looking around as if Carol might pop out from behind a bush. "I saw what happened yesterday. Good for you." "It's about time someone stood up to her." He pushed the box toward me. "You was cleaning out my garage. Found these. Thought you might find them useful." I took the box inside. It was full of old papers from his time as the AC's first secretary 30 years ago. And right on top was a neatly typed document. Minutes of the first annual meeting of the Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association. The 12th of June, 1989. I scanned down the page. Item 4, New Business. And there it was, a summary of the discussion about my property, memorializing developer John Oak Haven's statement that Lot 1 was, and always would be, private. It corroborated the videotape perfectly. Mr. Henderson was my fearful ally, and he had just delivered the written proof. The final escalation came 2 days later, just as I had predicted. A courier delivered a thick envelope. It was from the HOA law firm. Inside was a notice of a temporary restraining order hearing, scheduled for the following week, and a massive legally baseless fine for $5,000 for a failure to comply with community landscaping standards and for harassing HOA board members and their contractors. It was a desperate, over-the-top move. It was also a beautiful piece of evidence. She was using the HOA's money to sue me into giving them my land, based on a foundation of her own lies. I scanned the documents, added them to my file, and called Jean. "It's time," I said. "She's filed the suit. We have a venue." Jean chuckled. Perfect. She just saved us the filing fee." But I had no intention of letting this play out over months in a courtroom. A lawsuit is a blunt instrument. I wanted something more elegant, more immediate. I wanted to resolve this not with a judge's gavel, but with a quiet, undeniable act of ownership. The restraining order hearing was in 5 days. Carol had also called a special community meeting for the evening before the hearing. The agenda, which she'd emailed to the entire neighborhood, was singular. A vote to approve a special assessment for the legal fund to reclaim the community orchard. She was going to make the residents pay for her personal vendetta. That meeting, I decided, would be the stage for the final act. But the climax would happen before that. The day before the meeting, I made a series of phone calls. The first was to a man named David, the son of an old friend who ran a commercial harvesting operation in the next county. The second was to the local food bank. The third was to a commercial lighting rental company. That night, under the glare of 4 powerful, generator-powered light towers that turned my orchard into a surreal day-lit stage, Davida's crew of a dozen professionals got to work. They moved with a quiet, practiced efficiency that was mesmerizing to watch. There was no shouting, just the hum of the generators, the rustle of leaves, the soft thud of apples being placed gently into bins. They were artists. I stood on my porch, a thermos of coffee beside me, and watched them harvest my entire orchard. Every Gravenstein, every Honeycrisp, every Fuji and Gala, every Boss pear, every single plum. They stripped the trees bare. It was a strange sight, a season's worth of life and growth being packed away in a matter of hours. By 4 a.m., the trucks were loaded. David handed me a manifest, over 4 tons of premium fruit. The lead truck driver handed me a donation receipt from the food bank, a triplicate form, which I signed. He kept 1 copy, I kept 2. As the sun rose, the same silver light from the morning of the bolt cutters revealed a transformed landscape. The orchard was still there. The trees stood in their perfect rows, but they were barren. Their branches, which had been heavy with fruit just yesterday, were now stark and empty against the morning sky. The visual effect was shocking. It was an orchard in memory only. The A community aseda Carol had built her entire campaign on had vanished overnight. I took one of the copies of the donation receipt, and using 4 thumbtacks, I affixed it to the new unpainted wooden gate my son-in-law had helped me install yesterday afternoon. Then I went inside, brewed a fresh pot of coffee, and sat in my kitchen window to wait. At 8:15 a.m. she arrived. She was not in a tracksuit today. She was wearing a blazer, ready for her triumphant pre-hearing photo op. 2 of her loyal board members were with her. They pulled up, and for a long moment, they just sat in the car, staring. I could see their mouths moving, the confusion and disbelief on their faces. Carol got out of the car and walked slowly toward the gate, her followers trailing behind her like pilot fish. She saw the empty branches, the bare trees. The entire premise of her lawsuit, her special meeting, her power play, was gone. It had been legally, quietly, and completely harvested. She stopped at the gate and stared at the donation receipt. Her face went through a remarkable series of transformations, from confusion to dawning comprehension to pure unadulterated rage. Her mask of calm, civic-minded authority didn't just slip. It shattered. She spun around and saw me sitting at my window, coffee mug in hand. You!" she screamed, her voice cracking. What did you do?" "What did you do?" I took a slow sip of my coffee, then walked outside and stood on my porch. "A good morning, Carol," I said calmly. "I harvested my crop from my land. It is what one does with an orchard. A HOA, you can do that. That is community property." "You stole it," she sputtered, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Ataya, is hard to steal something you own," I said. "As for the fruit, it was donated to the food bank, in the name of the Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association. You should get a nice letter from them for your tax records." The sheer procedural irony of it seemed to break her. The idea that I had used her own organization as name to donate fruit she considered stolen from them was a knot she couldn't untie. She just stood there, speechless, her mouth opening and closing. The performance was over. There was nothing left but a very angry woman standing in front of a barren orchard that had, until last night, been the centerpiece of her power. The special community meeting that evening was held in the clubhouse. The room was packed. Chatter spread about the mysterious overnight harvest. The atmosphere was tense and confused. Carol and her 2 remaining board allies sat at the front table, looking grim. I took a seat in the back row with Mr. Henderson on one side and Sarah on the other. On my lap, I had a stack of folders, one for every household in the association. Carol called the meeting to order. Her voice was brittle. She tried to stick to her script, launching into a rambling, emotional speech about my deplorable act of vandalism and theft of community assets. She spoke of a sabotage and the need for the community to band together to fund the lawsuit to reclaim what is rightfully ours. But her performance fell flat. The audience was restless. They had all driven past the orchard. They had seen the empty trees. Her narrative was disconnected from the physical reality just up the hill. When she finished, a resident in the front row raised his hand. Carol, I'm a little confused. How can we be suing to reclaim a community orchard if there's nothing in it? What exactly are we paying for? Carol faltered. We are paying to establish the legal precedent, to ensure he can never do this again. Sarah, the disillusioned board member, chose that moment to stand up. Her voice was quiet but steady. I have a procedural question. Was the board ever presented with a copy of the deed or the official county plat map for Lot 1 before we were asked to approve filing a lawsuit? Carol shot her a venomous look. That is not relevant. We were acting on legal advice. I think it's very relevant, Sarah said, and I think the community deserves to see all the documents before we vote on a special assessment. That was my cue. I stood up. I can help with that, I said, my voice carrying easily in the silent room. Mr. Henderson and I began walking up the aisles, handing a folder to every resident. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Arthur Miller. I own the property you know as the Miller Orchard. Everything you need to know to make an informed decision tonight is in these packets. A quiet rustle filled the room as people opened the folders. I walked to the front and stood at the podium Carol had just vacated. I didn't need to speak. The documents would speak for themselves. I watched their faces as they read. I saw them look at the clear, undeniable copy of my deed. I saw their eyebrows raise as they examined the highlighted plat map, the one that explicitly excluded my land. I heard murmurs as they read the minutes from the 1989 meeting, where the developer himself had settled the issue. They saw Sarah's signed affidavit accusing Carol of lying to the board. They saw the bill for the landscapers' HOA funds spent on private property. They saw a copy of the sheriff's report number. And on the last page, they saw the draft of my countersuit against Carol Bradshaw, personally, for fraud, slander of title and harassment, and against the HOA for gross mismanagement and breach of fiduciary duty. The silence in the room curdled into a low, angry buzz. People were looking at the documents, then up at Carol, then back at the documents. The story they had been told was crumbling in their hands, replaced by a much clearer and much uglier one. Finally, Mr. Henderson stood up in the back. "I make a motion," he said, his voice stronger than I had ever heard it. "Ought to recall Carol Bradshaw as president of this association, effective immediately." From across the room another resident shouted. A second, chaos erupted. Carol was on her feet, screaming about rules of order, but no one was listening. Her power, which was built on a carefully constructed illusion of authority and control, had evaporated in the face of a few, simple, verifiable pieces of paper. The vote was a landslide. She was stripped of her presidency right there. In the room she had intended to be her stage of triumph. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Sarah was elected interim president. The lawsuit against me was dropped the next morning. The HOA's lawyer, upon seeing my packet of documents, advised them to settle my countersuit immediately. The HOA's insurance covered the damages, which mostly consisted of my legal prep fees and the cost of the new gate. So, Carola's portion was handled by her homeowner's insurance, but the claim, combined with the public humiliation, was the final straw. Within 2 months, a for sale sign went up in front of her house. I heard she moved to another state. Under Sarah's guidance, the community began to heal. The board initiated a full audit of the HOA's finances and rulebook. Dozens of Carol laws, petty, vindictive fines, were rescinded and the money refunded. The holiday decoration contest was reinstated, with the only rule being a have fun. Mr. Henderson put his wife's bird bath back in its original spot, and his garden gnomes soon returned to stand guard over it. People started talking to each other again, not in whispers but as neighbors. A few weeks after the meeting, I was out in the orchard, pruning the dormant apple trees. A peaceful, meditative task. Mr. Henderson walked up the gravel drive, the first time he had set foot on the property in years. He wasn't carrying a box, just 2 mugs of coffee. We stood there for a long time, sipping the coffee and looking out over the valley. "Pwit. You know, he said finally, Eleanor would have hated all the fighting, but she would have loved how you finished it." Quietly. With the paperwork, was right. She despised conflict. But she also had a fierce belief in doing things the right way. Order, fairness, and the simple truth of a thing. Today, the orchard is quiet. The trees are leafing out for spring. Their branches bare of fruit but full of promise. The lawsuit is a bound volume on my shelf, a closed chapter. The manila folder is back in my filing cabinet, a little thicker now, but its purpose served. At the entrance to the drive, there is a new sign. Cast small, made of carved cedar, and professionally installed. It doesn't say, a Cavan Community Orchard. It says simply, a Miller Orchard. Private property, Est, 1958. Sometimes I stand on my porch with my morning coffee, and look at that sign. It's not a monument to victory. A statement of fact. A quiet affirmation that ownership is not just a claim you make, but a responsibility you uphold. It has a story told, not in arguments and accusations, but on paper, in ink, and by the quiet, unyielding truth of a survey line, holding firm against the seasons. The peace that has settled over this land is the peace of a problem solved correctly, a long equation balanced at last. And it is a peace that is well worth the trouble,